So we're close to the end here. I want us to start thinking about whether we're getting closer to understanding some of the thoughts we've addressed over the last couple of days. We've worried about the supply of bearded bros, but we're also trying to move past them. We're excited about new categories, but we're afraid of the impact on craft. So here's where we're going, into the consumer side of things. Our final talk will go into the way craft is reaching consumers in new ways, in new communities. But first, we got to talk to Lester. We got to get Lester Jones from the NBWA up here. He is the chief economist. He's going to tell us about all these things that are causing us mental discomfort. I believe he calls it cognitive beer dissonance. Dissonance.
Yes.
Lester, it's your show.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for flying Brewbound Airlines. Please raise your seat backs and your tray tables and put your cell phones on airplane mode. Due to the short nature of this flight, we will not have, Due to the short nature of this flight, we will not have beverage service. But before we take off, I have two safety videos for you. The first two safety slides for you. The first one is what we have is a partnership at NBWA with FinTech. And what we get is every week we get a feed of STRs, sales to retailers, through EFT transactions. And what this data gives us is this ability to kind of look at the pulse of the industry. And I call this kind of the EKG or the pulse, or however you want to look at it. It's the weeks down at the bottom, starting at week 1 through week 52, and case volumes going up the vertical axis. We run about 14 million cases on average through the system. And what you see in this data is as the year unfolds, we have great opportunities in the beer industry and not such great opportunities in the beer industry. But if you're looking for opportunity, this is a great way to look at it. So start at week 1. There's not a lot of drinking going on because we're recovering from week 52 at the end there. But for most parts, when I look at 2018 and 2019, what I see is an industry that is pretty much doing what it did last year. Of course, the mix is a lot different, but the basic volume flowing into retailers. Now, this is EFT data, so it's going to both on and off premise. It includes all kinds of beer, seltzers, imports, crafts. Everything's lumped in together. It's not specific to any one segment. But you can kind of see, a couple of things that I like to point out is kind of that red bar right over there, the 4th of July. 4th of July was on a Wednesday. And what it magically did is it split the week in two, and we had 2 great holiday weekends instead of one where you see it in the blue line in the middle of the year where it was kind of focused on that in that first week. And then you kind of see the second part, kind of that fall when we had that nice warm weather in October that kind of gave us that little Indian summer around the country. That kind of gave us a little lift above average. So it was kind of nice to see the industry have some nice spots for the year. I just did the November Beer Purchasers Index. What I do with NBWA beer purchasers, and I call them all up, not all of them, a sample of them. I say, hey, thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this industry are you guys ordering more beer, less beer, or about the same? And it turns into what I call a Beer Purchasers Index, just like the Purchasing Managers Index. I kind of ripped that off from them, but it serves the same purpose. Are we expanding our orders or are orders contracting? It doesn't tell you how much, just if these beer purchasers are ordering more or less. And what I found for 2019 November was the total industry was kind of a little below, but not that much different than it was last year. And things like imports have slowed down a little bit. Craft is a little bit slower. The premium lights, premium regulars, a little bit stronger, but they're still way below the 50 mark. And meanwhile, that FMB category, which includes your seltzers, is still one of the strongest measures out there in terms of orders, and then at the far end of the slide are ciders. So everything's kind of, for November, things kind of not so great, but there's some good news in there in some of the segments. So hold those thoughts in mind while I go forward. So I talk about cognitive beer dissonance. I talk about this mental discomfort that people get when conflicting pieces of information kind of give them discomfort because they don't know how to reconcile everything. When we look at the post-2010 recession, right? We had a recession 2008, 2010, and a whole bunch of things changed. And what changed is as the demographics, the economics changed, we saw this entrance of the millennial drinker into the legal drinking age alcohol beverage market. We saw this explosion of choice from flavored forward beers and from ciders and from hard sodas and now even seltzers today. We've seen an expansion in retail, which most people don't talk about. And then we've seen the high-end growth, this desire by the larger brewers to trade people up from the premiums into the higher premiums, which had a lot to do with declining volumes. And then there are all these red herrings that came out. I call these red herrings because they distract us. They make us put blinders on and think differently about the industry. It's the cannabis. It's the health and wellness trends. It's the dry January. It's the sober curious. All these things we tend to focus on, but we focus very myopically on them with blinders, and we don't step back and take the big picture. Let me walk through some of these things. Since 2010, we've added more suppliers to this industry, more retailers, and frankly, just more products than we've ever seen before. In terms of the numbers of manufacturers of alcohol beverage permitted TTB, we went from 11,000 to over 27,000. That's a lot of people making alcohol. We went from retail around 536,000 to 645,000 alcohol beverage retailers. And then this is the label approvals that I pull off the TTB. Back in 2010, they approved roughly 100,000 labels in 1 year. Last year, they approved almost 200,000 new labels. And that's cumulative every year. So all that product is now out there. You guys know this, but it's kind of like something you don't really see it in a slide that often. So like I said, and it's not just beer, it's brewing, it's distilling, and it's vintning. I like to tell people, Washington, D.C., with all their grape vineyards, has 5 vintners. I haven't seen a grape growing in D.C. for years. I don't know where they get their grapes, but they now have 5 permitted wineries in Washington, D.C. alone. So, you can see in 2008, when we entered the recession, it was kind of slow here, and we started adding stores. But look at 2010, and we just launched in terms of how many places people can buy alcohol beverages. It was pretty phenomenal. But yet, in 2019, things have fallen apart, and we just heard a great discussion about how regulation and how minimum wage has started hurting restaurants. Well, you got it right here on the graph. Right down there, you can see how all of a sudden we reached maximum retail in 2018, and now things have started petering off. A lot of stories in here to talk about what's happening in the retail marketplace when you see that kind of shift in trend for retail establishments. And yeah, it's a little bit of e-commerce. We see the evolution of retail growing with Drizzly and Minibar and Clink and all these other guys and all this ability to expand the virtual marketplace. But I like to tell people, remember, e-commerce works in brick and mortar. And it's not an either or, it's a together. And so you got to watch how this market expands and what's really causing the changes. Where we drink, how we drink, what we drink is changing in phenomenal ways. I am amazed everywhere I go when I look at the cultural acceptance of alcohol, where people are willing and going out to drink. It's libraries, it's barbers, it's salons, it's theme parks, it's retirement homes. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And so many other non-traditional marketplaces. So when people talk about us, sober curious, beer drinking's down, yet the expanding ability to go drink in so many more places is kind of counterintuitive to this. Well, if we're all drinking less, why are we drinking in so many more places, right? Just got to start thinking about how the marketplace is growing. Almost 2,000 alcohol beverage laws have been signed since 2012 around this country. We heard from the Texas guys last year about Beer to Go and how they work together. That's just one example of literally thousands of laws that are changing in this marketplace every day. And it hasn't stopped. In 2019, we see dry counties going away. We see efforts to change access to we see the 3-2 laws in Colorado and Oklahoma. Lots of laws are changing constantly in this marketplace. And at the same time, we kind of get this feeling that just being independent and craft is not enough, and the growth of this experiential marketplace, and how you just have to offer more and more experience to get those people to come in and hang out with you. But it's not, once again, we still see and hear all the talk about how beer is dead and how people aren't drinking, yet before us is this growing, expanding experiential marketplace. And what's interesting is that when you look at alcohol consumption over time, we drink very consistently. This goes back to 1939, guys. The Gallup poll would call people on the old-timey grandma phone and ask them, do you have occasion to drink alcohol? And grandma said, yeah, 2/3 of the time. You know, they call grandma on her iPad today or her iPhone today, and they pretty much give the same response. Yeah, it's very consistent over time. And what I like to do to just drive this point home, which I'm going to do in the next couple of slides, is that if you take all the beer, all the wine, all the spirits, all the cider, all the mead, and you reduce them down to their pure ethanol, pure alcohol, and you look at what's happened from 2010 to 2018, you will find that we consistently drink 2.5 gallons of pure alcohol per year. It's as if the milkman delivered 2.5-gallon milk jugs at your door on January 1st and said, good luck, I'll be back next year. You can turn it into wine, you can turn it into beer, but you have the year to drink it. And it's, you know, how you drink it has been phenomenally different. You know, do we drink it between beer or wine or spirits, or do you drink it as high-end, low-end craft? All these things are moving around amongst it. But the reality is over time, we've been pretty reliable, predictable consumers of alcohol beverage. And when 2019 is done, that number is going to hit 2.5, maybe 2.51. And it's, you know, that's national data. That's if I look nationally, I take a big number for beer, a big number for wine, a big number for spirits. Total US, I hit 2.5 gallons. I could take the same methodology. I can go to any one of my government, my state websites like the Texas ABC, download what they sold every year, do the same kind of math, and I get the same kind of results. A little bit more variability, but it's, once again, we're drilling down onto those states. And now, obviously, when I look at Colorado, and I do that same math, pull all that data off the Department of Revenue website, multiply it out by its ABV, what you find is that, lo and behold, Colorado is younger, more youthful, stronger, a little bit stronger economy. They're drinking a little bit more alcohol than Colorado, but on average, it's pretty darn predictable. And that's why I say when you look for these red herrings like cannabis and all this, you know, confounding news, go back to the raw data. It sits out on the website. Download it, do the math, and you will find that in 2019, they are consuming a very predictable and steady amount of alcohol beverage in Colorado. Big shifts between where and how, what locations and what retail locations, whether it's beer, wine, or spirits, but it's changing. Even Her Majesty's Royal Revenue Customs, this is UK data. I just went over the UK website, downloaded their total ethanol, and they do total ethanol divided by their population. They use a 15 plus, but if you turn it into gallons, in the UK, they're doing the same thing, and that's where that whole damn sober curious movement started. And dry January, it was, and you know, look at, it ain't working, guys. You know, people are having a good time. Why are they having a good time? Let's talk about that. US demographics. Demographics are destiny. When you look at the demographic profile of the United States, there's 20 million more people in this country today than there were in 2010. 20 million more people. That's the entire state of Florida. Like we plopped an entire state of California. We put a bouncer with a little thing on there and said, are you 21? Come on in. Right? So that's the sheer volume of new drinkers we have in this economy, right? And at the same time, we're getting older. We know fertility rates are down. We know millennials are not really, they're getting close to, but they're not really bumping that fertility rate up yet and forming households and having children. So we're aging and getting older to the point that 3 out of every 4 people are going to be over the age of 21. That's radically different than we had just 10 years ago and even 20 years ago. For those of you who have seen this, I'll bring it out again. For those of you who don't, that's the number of people in each single age category. Vertical axis, number of people. Horizontal axis, the age. So you can see 0 to 1 year old is about 3.8 million people in that single age group. Work your way down the line, you get to 84, and it flows down to roughly 1 million people in that age group. But look at the peaks. Look at the tops up there. The tops are the millennials up there, right around 2021, right around 28, 29. They peak out at over 4.6 million people in that single age group. Go down to that irrelevant 40-year-old where Justin and I reside. We are irrelevant because we are just not as powerful a force in the marketplace relative to both those baby boomers and those millennials. But what's happening is both of those generations are in formidable transition points of their lives. These guys are getting older. 10,000 of them retire every day in this country. And what happens when you retire? You tell me. And at the same time, those millennials are now entering the labor force. They're getting jobs. They're earning income. But they're not earning income in a really strong way because they're young. You don't really get into the money times until you reach around 35, 40. So you can't start at the top. You got to work your way up. And we're going to talk about how that changes in a little bit as well. So anyway, hold on to that thought because look how broad the market is across the age spectrum. If you went back to 1980 and you looked at the US population, this is what it looked like. I mean, for the big brewers doing Bud Light and Miller Lite and big beer, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's everyone, all those baby boomers sitting right over. Remember, the drinking age was 18 too, was 18, and per capita beer consumption was the highest it ever was. But the reality is things changed. We're never going to see this profile of the US economy again. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, and beer was king back then, and there was a lot of young people, and they had a lot of good times. I don't want to go too much over the 80s, but there's 224 million of them in total. 2018, 327 million people spread across a broad spectrum of income and socioeconomic classes. But how do people spend on alcohol? Consumer expenditure survey. You take the consumer expenditure survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they survey 100,000 households, ask them, how do you spend your money? And what we find in this data is that people, like the way they drink, spend their money pretty consistently. About 1% of their disposable income gets spent on alcohol. And that's from 1990 to 2017. Yeah, it goes up and down a little bit. You see it a little, you don't see much change in the 2008 to 2010 recession. But, the fact is it's pretty darn consistent. When I look at consumer spending, I look at across these demographic groups, you can kind of see 2010, 2017, and the different age groups. So this is total consumer spending. There are those less than 25-year-old households, and you can actually see they're not really participating in the economic expansion. They're not getting the wage gains that you would expect. They're not spending the money. Maybe that's a reason they're not drinking so much beer, high-end beer. Well, maybe. I don't know. You tell me. But work your way down that chart. There's 45 to 54. That's the peak of your spending, of your earning potential and your spending potential. And if you remember that irrelevant age, that's the dip. That's what we're missing. That's what we feel when we feel the beer market pulling back a little bit. Because that prime age earning at almost $74,000 a year is now the most irrelevant age demographic in the marketplace. And meanwhile, those younger people don't have that income potential that they need to grow the market. And then there's at 75 plus, they're actually doing pretty well. I shift this slide to how much you spend on alcohol. Right? Let's shift to how much today. That's that 1% of disposable income that people spend on alcohol. And here's this thing again that gets everybody all worked up. You got less than 25. They're actually spending less on alcohol in 2017 than they did in 2010. How do you figure that? And meanwhile, look at grandma down there in the 75 plus. What is she doing? That's a CAGR. That's every year, compound average growth over that 7 year. Each year, 10% more spent on alcohol. And go back to that 45 to 54-year-old group. That's that dip. They're the big spenders. They're spending a little bit more, but they just don't have enough. There's not enough stomachs in that age category to really move the ball along. The old white guys with beers. You know who buys the alcohol. You don't always drink it. I love this thing right here. This is the share of 25 to 29-year-old males that still live at home. So, maybe grandma's just spending 10% more money to keep Junior shut up in the basement. That could be it. That could be part of it. Once again, it's that dissonance. It's what's actually happening in the marketplace and who's spending and who's buying what. And while women are doing a great job at finding their way in the world, the young guys are struggling a little bit. Developmentally slow. Anyway, how am I doing on time? All right, we're going to knock this out in enough time. At the same time, there's this great disparity of wealth. I pulled this off the Bloomberg Federal Reserve data, shows the wealth that the baby boom generation has accumulated. That's $80 trillion at the bottom there for that baby boomer. That's all their assets, their houses, their cars, their mutual funds, their pensions, and their private businesses and all these other assets. I think it's like $70 trillion, almost $80 trillion. Remember, student debt crisis is $1.5 trillion. So, we can expect something phenomenal that this economy is never going to see before in the next 10 years. It's, you can't take it with you. Stop wasting, all you millennials, stop wasting the okay boomer. And I say, okay boomer, you can't take it with you. So let's start spending it and giving it away or doing something with it, because that's a lot of wealth. That will be interesting to see how it pans out over the next 10 years. And it's not, like I said, take your blinders off. Don't look for sober curious to explain, or dry January, or cannabis. I pulled this off the expenditure tables. It's how much money is spent on healthcare and how much is spent on transportation, right? Look at the less than 25s. Obamacare came along and mandated that everyone has health insurance, so they had to write a check, and they had to spend money where they weren't doing that before. That takes away disposable income. At the same time, Uber and Lyft came out, and these young people are spending more and more money driving around in Ubers and Lyfts. That is part of the taking away of the dollar. So don't go, stop looking at what you read in the paper and what is kind of those obvious, explanations of why people are changing their behavior, and look a little bit further in your markets of why. And at the same time, you have this economy that's changed dramatically. We are a service economy. The blue line there represents kind of that manufacturing world of manufacturing and construction and landscaping and mining and logging. We haven't recovered those, what I call thirsty jobs, those outside thirsty jobs. They still haven't recovered from their pre-recession peaks of 130,000 people. Meanwhile, service employment, education and finance and banking and technology have all grown well beyond that spot. No wonder the beer market and the alcohol beverage market doesn't look the same, because the people that have control of the purse strings and who have wallets with money and wages in them don't look the same. Rural versus urban. The rural markets have not recovered in this last 8 years. They're still well below their employment. They're still below their employment index when you look at 2007. Meanwhile, the metro and urban markets have just seen tremendous growth in employment. This is a change in where people are buying alcohol and where are they spending their money. When I look at the differences across genders, I can look at, here's male versus females. I see this is the Scarborough data. I love Scarborough data because it's a large panel survey, and it surveys households and asks them, have you had a beer in the last 30 days, amongst all these other things. So it's not beer-centric. It's kind of consumer across a broad spectrum of goods. But you can kind of see between male and females, craft beer, imports, and light beers all kind of skew heavy on the male, 40% over the index. And meanwhile, when you look at the ciders, the F&Bs, and the wines, and the liquor, it starts skewing a little bit more gender neutral. And we heard a lot of people talking about the general neutrality of the beverages. This is kind of what you see in the long-term trends. And when I look at beer, even when I go back to 2012, I collect this Scarborough data every 6 months. I get it, and I check it. And we've done a great job in the beer industry in general that bringing female consumers into it. The reality is it's still primarily dominated by male drinkers. And this problem isn't solved. We got a long way to go, guys, in terms of moving these index numbers closer together. And like I said, who's working? It's clearly men 25 to 34 have left the labor market. And now maybe it has a lot to do with the types of jobs and opportunities they have, but the reality is as the female 25 to 34 have come back to the market in a much more significant way than they have in the past. And at the same time, when you look at education and you look at female share of workers with bachelor's degrees in the marketplace, it's finally met parity up there. Look down at 2000. When it was almost a couple million difference, and now today it's right up there. And when you look at college education, there's more women coming out of colleges. So you can expect this labor market to continue to change, and you can expect the people that are spending money, I said for years, no cerveza, no dinero. You can't be unemployed and just randomly drink. You're basically dependent upon your friends to buy you a drink. So who's spending the money? the people that have the income. So, I'm rocking and rolling here. I got 4 minutes. I read 2 fun books this year. One was Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens. He's a Google data science. He did all these great little stories doing Google Trends. And another fun book I read was Robert Shiller, who's an economist who talked about narratives. And, I was laying in bed one night, and I read these great books. I wonder how I can bring them together to kind of help describe what's going on in the beer market today. And that led me to this. This is a fun slide. It takes me back to FinTech that I introduced you to on the first slide. And what it is weekly case volumes for all seltzers. White Claw, Truly, Bon and Vive, Spike Seltzer from Diageo, Natty. Everything's in there, right? And what I did is I married it up against Google Trends, which is how many times someone went into Google and said, hard seltzer. What is hard seltzer? Where can I buy hard seltzer? What is hard seltzer made of? Whenever that hard seltzer got entered into Google Trends, they kind of recorded. It's a ton of fun. You will get lost for hours. Has anyone spent time on the Google Trends before? Yeah, you can get lost for hours. I mean, you start putting things together. But anyway, what was fun about this slide is that, when you look at we really didn't pick up any seltzers in the market until week 13, kind of first quarter, second quarter of 2013. And you see that gray line? That's that instance of Google Trends, of how many people pinging it in Google. And Google puts an index up against 100, and that kind of gives you that gauge of how significant the searches are up against Google. Now, this isn't academic science. I mean, this is not, really good academic research, but at least gives you an idea of how much people are interested in it. And what you see is as you work this blue line, which is the case volume, and you work the gray line, which is the index, you can kind of see how the narrative of hard seltzers kind of took hold of the American consumer and kind of grew this market. And it's so much fun because, you work through 2016, 2017, and there's 2017. It kind of falls off. But then it falls off again. It peters out in the seasonality. And then 2018 comes along, and we start seeing more and more seltzer in the market. And you can kind of see that interest on the gray line. It kind of picks up with it. And then everything goes away. We all go to sleep in January. We're all full from our New Year's dinners and whatnot, but then it comes back. And then the second part is 2019 and week 1, not so much going on. A year kind of ended the way it started in 2018 and 2019, but then you can see what just happened in 2019. The thing went viral, exploded, right? And you can kind of see those case volumes hit the market. They go all the way up here until right around week 25, 26, where they peak, and then what happened? There's a shortage. People couldn't get their claws, right? And look at the Google trend. When all this hysteria was going on, all this internet action and all these viral stuff was going on, everybody was going to Google. What are these hard seltzers? And that's what drove that market to new heights, which is phenomenal. And then, of course, you can see that point right around week 37, that shortage was overcome. They got everything back in the market. Kind of viral nature, the narrative of not having it around kind of fell away. And we were left with this, kind of back down to normal. And then as we enter the fall and things got warm, things got cold, as the weather got kind of crappy, as you may know, certain parts of the country, kind of everything went away. So the big question is what happens next year and how does that roll out? So I took the Google Trends and I just put in a couple of brands just for giggles. And what I saw made my eyes pop out because first of all, we know that 50% of the market, 53, 54, however you want to cut it, belongs to White Claw, and maybe 20, 25% belongs to Truly, and then everyone else is scrapping over and duking it out over the other quarter of the market. Did that math add up? Yeah, should add up. But anyway, you can kind of see how it all is dominated by those 2 brands. And really, White Claw really stole the show, at least from the consumer's eye, in terms of how they're going to Google to figure out what things are, and really peaked out. But everything's back down to normal now as we end the year. So it's going to be incredibly interesting to see next year just how much the narrative, and that's why I put that narrative book up there, and how important it is to keep narratives going in the marketplace to keep consumers' attention. I'm out of time. Bang. Thank you for flying.
Let's sit down for 2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right,
Yeah.
we can do that.
So I'm irrelevant. I'm 42
I know.
years
I
old.
apologize to all the 40-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm irrelevant. My dollars are guaranteed. And I'm struck by the 25 to 34 jobs declining and the 75-year-old spending going up. So to me, this is a story of discretionary spending.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
So,
it's a story of discretionary spending and how people can spend money, but actually that broad spectrum of consumers that we have, we just can't rely anymore on that one demographic group to really pull things along.
okay.
You got to think broadly.
Well, it seems like to you talk, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities outside of the age cohorts that, we talk about all the time, we beat to death, the Gen Zs, the millennials. So I guess when you look at the 75s, aren't they going to expire before?
Yeah, I
they
can't
have
help
the
that.
time
We all
to-
expire. But it's funny, I was at a meeting, at a beer distributor meeting, and I was showing that slide, and I said, how many people actually have accounts in retirement communities or 50-plus communities? And I've asked that so many places, and everyone looks at me blankly, and actually someone raised their hand and said, we have a dedicated account team to 50-plus communities. We go in there and figure out exactly what's going on in that vicinity, in that area of that 50-plus community, and we make sure the products are right for them. Because you know what? People visit their parents, even if they're living in 50-plus communities. So like I said in that slide, we don't know who's drinking it. Even that 75-plus might be grabbing a six-pack of craft. They might be grabbing it for their kid, their son or their family who's coming to visit. So
Well, if the
you don't
employment's
know.
going down, you would
Well,
think
you
so.
would think they need it. Hey, can I come visit your mom? Sure, come on over. I'll
Might
grab
not
a
have to go
six-pack.
visit, yeah.
So,
like you said, they're in the basement.
But I mean, my point is it's very dynamic, and it's not so much that it's not as focused as it used to be.
Right. Well, we are out of time.
All
Thank
right.
you, Lester. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys.